There is a moment most people have experienced, even if they never talked about it out loud. You are going through something hard, something that does not seem fair, and somewhere inside you, a quiet voice asks, "Why is this happening to me?" And almost instantly, an answer comes. Not from logic, but from something deeper, something almost automatic. You think, God is testing me. Maybe you say it to yourself. Maybe someone says it to you. This is just a test. You have to pass it. And somehow, that answer is supposed to bring comfort. But often, it does not. Often it just brings more pressure, because now you are not only suffering, you are also afraid of failing. You start watching yourself. You start performing. You wonder, am I responding to this the right way? Am I being faithful enough? Strong enough? Grateful enough? And instead of peace, you feel a quiet kind of desperation. Like you are in an exam you were never given the material for. So let me ask you something. What if the whole idea of God testing you has been misunderstood? Not slightly, but fundamentally. What if the tests are not about your performance at all? What if they never were? Most of us grew up with a very specific image of what divine testing looks like. A problem appears, God watches, you respond, He evaluates, you pass or fail. It is clean. It is logical. It fits the way we were taught to think about school, about work, about earning approval. But here is what that image quietly does to you. It places you in a position of permanent audition. It suggests that your worth, your spiritual standing, is always conditional, always up for review. And if you have spent any time living under that belief, you know what it does to a person. It makes you anxious in exactly the moments when you most need to be still. It turns pain into a performance. It turns grief into a test of character. It turns the hardest moments of your life into opportunities to prove something. But prove it to whom? And why would a force that is said to know everything need you to prove anything? That is the first crack in the story we were told. A God who already knows the depth of your heart does not need a demonstration. So then, why do hard things happen? Why does life break open sometimes without warning, without explanation, without anything that looks like fairness? This is where the real conversation begins, because the answer, when you let yourself sit with it, is almost the opposite of what most people expect. The hard thing is not designed to measure you. It is designed to reveal you, to yourself, not to God, not to anyone watching from the outside, to you. Because here is the strange truth about human beings. We do not actually know ourselves very well in easy times. When life is comfortable, we can believe almost anything about who we are. We can believe we are patient because we have never been pushed past patience. We can believe we are trusting because we have never been given a reason not to trust. We can believe we are loving because nothing has tested the limits of our love. Comfort is a kind of sleep, and in that sleep, we carry around an image of ourselves that may be entirely fictional. Then something breaks, and suddenly what was hidden becomes visible, not to God, to you. You discover you are angrier than you thought, more afraid than you admitted, more attached to control than you ever wanted to believe. And here is the thing. That discovery is not a punishment. It is not God showing you how weak you are. It is life offering you a map of yourself that you could not have found any other way. Think about it this way. A river does not know its own depth until something falls into it. You do not know what you are made of until something lands on you that is heavy enough to show you. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. And what you discover in those moments, that is not a verdict. That is an invitation to look honestly at what is there. Not to perform better, not to pass a test, but to understand yourself at a level that ordinary days never make possible. This is a very different kind of spirituality than most people were handed. It is not about earning. It is not about demonstrating. It is not about surviving long enough to get a reward. It is about waking up inside your own life, becoming conscious of what was always there, but invisible. Let me paint this more specifically, because I think when we keep it abstract, it stays comfortable. And comfortable is not what this is meant to be. Think about a moment when you lost something you loved. A relationship, maybe. Something you had built with years of your life. Something that felt like it held the shape of your future. In the first hours after that loss, something very raw emerges. You might feel it as anger, or as a grief so complete it is almost like silence. But underneath both of those things, if you stay with it long enough, there is something else. There is the thing you are most afraid of. Maybe it is the fear that you are not enough. Maybe it is the fear that love is not safe. Maybe it is the deeper and older belief that good things were never really yours to keep. The loss did not create that fear. It revealed it. It showed you something that was already living inside you, quietly shaping every choice you made, every wall you built, every time you held back. And if you were brave enough to look at that fear directly, not to run from it, not to drown it in distraction, but to actually look, something strange would happen. It would begin to lose its power over you. Not immediately, not completely, but enough to change the quality of your next decision. That is what difficulty is for. Not punishment, not performance review. Revelation. Now, let us go somewhere harder, because I think there is a version of this that most people avoid. We talk easily about external tests, illness, loss, failure, things that happen to us. But what about the tests that come from inside? The moments when you are the one who acts badly, when you say something cruel or make a choice you cannot fully justify, or fail someone who needed you. In the traditional model of divine testing, this is the moment you fail the exam. You were supposed to be patient. You were not. You were supposed to be generous. You were not. And so the conclusion writes itself. I am not a good person. I failed. I need to do better next time. But what of that response? The immediate self-judgment, the quick retreat into shame, is itself the thing worth examining. Because shame is almost never as honest as it pretends to be. Shame feels like accountability, but most of the time, it is just another form of hiding. When you decide you are bad, you stop having to look at what actually drove the behavior. You accept a verdict instead of doing the harder work of understanding. And so the cycle continues. You act out of fear or pain or an unmet need. You shame yourself. You resolve to do better. And eventually, you act out of fear or pain again. Nothing was actually seen. Nothing was actually understood. The loop just keeps turning. Real growth, the kind that actually changes the texture of your life, does not begin with a verdict. It begins with a question. Not why did I fail, but what was happening in me in that moment? Not what does this say about my character, but what does this show me about what I still carry? Those are very different questions. The first assumes the test is over and you failed it. The second understands that the real work is just beginning. Let me go deeper, because there is something underneath all of this that almost never gets named directly. Most people's relationship with the idea of divine testing is not really about God at all. It is about the earliest authorities in their lives. Think about where you first learned that love was conditional. Not in a philosophy class, in a kitchen, a bedroom, a classroom, a moment when the approval of someone important suddenly disappeared. You learned, very early, that good behavior was rewarded and failure was withdrawn from. And somewhere in that learning, a template was formed. A template that says, your worth is performance dependent. Love must be earned. And someone, somewhere, is always keeping score. And then, when life gets hard, that template activates. You project it onto the universe itself.
You imagine God with a clipboard.
You imagine points being subtracted. You imagine that if you respond the wrong way, something will be taken from you.
But that image
Is not theology. It is childhood. It is the echo of an old fear that was never fully resolved.
and this is perhaps
The most important thing this conversation is trying to say. The invitation in difficulty is not just to discover what you believe about yourself, it is to discover what you believe about love.
Do you believe love has conditions?
Do you believe the universe is fundamentally hostile or fundamentally generous? Do you believe you are put here to earn your place or to inhabit it?
Those beliefs are not just spiritual positions.
They are the architecture of your entire inner life. They determine how you wake up in the morning, how you respond when things go wrong, whether you approach life with your hands open or your fists clenched.
And they are almost
Impossible to examine in easy times. It takes pressure to bring them to the surface.
So the difficulty is not designed to measure
Whether you are good enough. It is designed, if you are willing to see it this way, to show you the exact shape of the beliefs that are quietly running your life.
and once you can see them,
You can question them. And once you can question them, they no longer have the same automatic power over you.
this is not a comfortable process.
I want to say that clearly because I have no interest in making this sound simpler than it is.
When the thing you most fear,
Is finally visible, it does not feel like enlightenment. It feels like exposure. It feels like standing in a room with no walls and no coat, in weather you were not prepared for.
but there is something on the other side of that feeling.
That cannot be described to someone who has not felt it. There is a kind of lightness that comes when you stop carrying something in secret. When the fear that shaped you from the shadows is finally out in the open, it becomes something you can actually work with.
It stops being the invisible hand.
That guides your decisions without your permission. It becomes something you can see, name, and consciously choose how to relate to.
That is what the hard things are offering you.
Not a verdict, not a score, but a kind of sight you could not have developed any other way. Now I want to speak about something very specific, because I think it is where most people get stuck in real life. You can understand all of this intellectually. You can nod along to everything I am saying and feel a genuine resonance. And then something hard actually happens, and none of it seems available to you. You fall right back into the old pattern, either performing or despairing or going numb.
Why does that happen?
Because insight lives in the mind, but the old patterns live in the body.
They live in the moment.
Your chest tightens when conflict appears. They live in the 3-second window when something goes wrong and your nervous system makes its automatic choice. The patterns were laid down before you had words. They are faster than thought, and no amount of understanding by itself changes them.
So here is what actually does
Change them. And this is the part that most spiritual conversations conveniently skip over.
You have to practice being present.
At the exact moment the pattern activates. Not after, not in reflection, in the moment.
This means
Learning to notice the tightness before it becomes a reaction. Learning to feel the fear before it becomes a defense. Learning to pause in the 3-second window before your old self takes over.
that pause.
Is everything. It is not dramatic. It does not feel like enlightenment. It is just a breath, a half-second of awareness.
But in that half second,
Something becomes possible that was not possible before. You can choose how to respond, rather than simply reenacting what you have always done.
that is what spiritual growth.
Actually looks like in the practical world. It is not a transformation that happens once, in a single moment of grace.
It is 1,000.
Small pauses. 1,000 moments where you catch yourself at the edge of the old pattern and choose just barely, to do something different.
And over time,
Slowly, unevenly, with many setbacks, the pauses start to come more naturally. The window gets wider. The old patterns lose their automaticity.
not because you passed a test,
Not because you earned something, but because you chose over and over to be present in the moments that mattered.
and here is the thing,
That makes this genuinely spiritual and not just psychological. There is a kind of grace that becomes available to you in those moments of presence that is not available anywhere else.
when you are performing,
You are closed. When you are despairing, you are collapsed. When you are numb, you are absent.
but when you are genuinely present,
When you are actually here, actually feeling, actually seeing, something flows through that space.
call it what you will.
Different traditions use different names, but almost every spiritual lineage in human history agrees on one thing. The divine is not found in the perfectly executed performance. It is found in the honest, open, present moment.
Even if that moment is painful,
Even if what you are present to is fear or grief or something you are not proud of,
presence itself,
is a form of prayer. Honesty itself is a form of devotion, and the willingness to see yourself clearly, not harshly, but clearly, is the closest thing to sacred that most of us will ever experience in ordinary life. So let me return to the question we started with. Why does God test people?
I want to offer you this.
Maybe the framing itself is the problem. Maybe what we call testing is actually something more like calling. Life calls you toward yourself. Difficulty calls you toward what is real. Pain calls you toward what you have not yet been willing to see. And that calling is not a judgment. It is an act of profound respect. It treats you as someone capable of growth, capable of depth, capable of becoming more awake than you currently are. The universe does not test the furniture. It does not challenge the things that cannot change. Only something that has the capacity to grow, to choose, to become. Only that kind of thing is called toward its edges. So when you are in the middle of something hard, when everything in you wants to know why this is happening, try sitting with a different question. Not, am I passing this test? But, what is being shown to me right now that I could not have seen before? Not, what do I need to do to get through this? But, what is this asking me to understand about myself? Not, when will this be over? But, what is this trying to open in me? Those questions will not make the hard thing easier. I want to be honest about that. The pain is still real. The loss is still real. The fear is still real. But the questions change your relationship to what is happening. They move you from a position of passive suffering into a position of active inquiry. And in that shift, small as it sounds, you stop being only a victim of your circumstances. You become, in some essential way, a participant in your own deepening. There is one last thing I want to say, and it may be the hardest thing in this entire conversation to receive. You are not being tested because you are lacking. You are not in difficulty because something is wrong with you. You are not being challenged because you need to prove your worth. You are being called because you are worth calling. Because there is something in you, not despite your fears and failures, but through them, that is capable of a depth of living that most people only glimpse. The hard things are not evidence against you. They are, in their strange and difficult way, evidence of your capacity. And when you can feel that, even for a moment, even imperfectly, something changes. Not in the circumstances, in you. The fear does not vanish, but it no longer has the same authority. The grief does not disappear, but it no longer feels like proof of abandonment. You begin to move through your life differently. Not perfectly, not without doubt or pain, but with something underneath you that was not there before. A quiet knowing that the hard things are not ending you. They are revealing you,
And what they reveal,
when you are willing to look, is not the small, afraid, performance-driven person you might have believed yourself to be.
it is something older than that.
Something that was never actually in danger of failing. Something that does not need to pass any test because it was never, at its core, on trial.
That is the real reason the hard things come.
Not to judge you, not to measure you, but to show you, slowly, sometimes painfully, always honestly, who you have always been, beneath every layer of fear you ever built.
And once you have seen that,
Even once, even briefly, you will never be quite as lost as you were before.